Did you know that 50 to 75% of people with ADHD are experiencing problems with their sleep? You're not alone. Trust me, I've been there myself. And I can tell you from my own experience that there is absolutely nothing wrong with you. The problem is not your brain, but it's actually that the advice that we are getting is not designed for our brain and it works against us. And the sooner you realize what's actually keeping you awake and how to address it, the sooner you can fix it. Hi, I'm Anne, the sleep nerd. I'm a sleep coach with ADHD. So in this video, I'm going to reveal why most of the sleep tips that you see out there just don't work for people with ADHD, and what are the strategies that actually have helped me and many of my clients overcome their sleep challenges. Sleep advice for people with ADHD typically looks something like this. You should keep a consistent sleep schedule, right? Get up at the same time every day, go to bed at the same time every day. Create a morning and bedtime routine so you can be consistent. Don't look at your screens before bed, your phone, keep it out of the bedroom, and avoid any kind of stimulation before bed. Now, all of this advice is all well and good and actually will help you sleep better and in turn make your ADHD more manageable. And that's what we want, right? But here's the problem. It's actually the same advice that we give to neurotypical people. It doesn't really address the unique challenges that people have with ADHD. And it just assumes that we are able to be consistent, to follow a routine, and to have all the executive functioning skills that require keeping a consistent schedule and going to bed at a reasonable time. Think about all the challenges that you have during the day, right? So you might be struggling with overthinking, racing thoughts, being understimulated and the urge to chase the dopamine. You might have time management issues and time blindness, as some might call it. You have a lot of hyper focus. So you're focusing on something very intensely and can't, rip yourself out of that. You struggle with transitioning between different tasks or starting or finishing a task. The ability to follow through on something and execute on something, and the ability to stick to routines and consistency. So why would that be any different when it comes to your sleep? You still have all of these same challenges, and they're going to come out at night or whenever you're trying to implement these sleep tips that you see. When people tell you to just stick to a regular bedtime and create a nice relaxing evening routine, you think, yeah, that's great, that's what I want, I'd love to do that, but we never really seem to be able to actually go through with it. You get stuck in another hyper focus, you stay up later than you wanted to, looking up all the movies that some random actor was in and then getting into all sorts of rabbit holes. And you just can't seem to get out of that. You try to go to sleep, but then your mind is racing, and then you finally fall asleep at some point, but it's so late. And then when you wake up in the morning, you're just exhausted, right? And you just can't get out of bed. And then again, your ADHD is making it so difficult for you to actually motivate yourself to get out of bed. So now your new perfect routine is already out the window. It has already fallen apart. And you think, well, what's the point? I might as well just give up because I can never follow through with anything. Okay, so what's the answer then to this problem? Well, it's simple, quite simple, but it's not necessarily easy. You really need to take a look at your unique situation. You need to understand yourself and your unique brain, and you need to work with your brain and not against it. Okay, so what do I mean by that? So let's break it down into a few areas. Let's start with step number 1, and that's awareness. Now, you are now aware of all the challenges that come with, sleep and ADHD. So that's a great first step. But you also need to look at yourself. So instead of trying a bunch of different random things and hoping for the best, you really need to start by assessing yourself. So you need to look at your current habits, behaviors, and really pinpoint where the issue actually lies. Because everyone is going to be slightly different. Even if you have ADHD, you're not going to have the same challenges as me. Especially because there are different types of ADHD, right? There's the inattentive type, the hyperactive type, and then there's the combined type. So it will look a little bit different for each person. So you need to understand yourself first. My challenge, for example, was not so much around getting to sleep on time. I was actually going to bed at a reasonable time, and I kind of enjoyed going to bed at 10 p.m. and I wanted to get sleep. But what I really struggled with was actually the racing thoughts and not being able to get to sleep. So I was getting really frustrated. And then the other piece was getting up in the morning. I just found it so difficult to drag myself out of bed, and that was my biggest struggle. But then some of my clients that I worked with, they were struggling with using technology in bed and using their phone and staying up all night. And, some of them were just simply looking for an easier way to transition to bedtime and kind of create a more healthy routine. So there's all sorts of different problems that we deal with. And in order to assess and understand ourselves better, we really need to dig into each area that affects our sleep. I have a free sleep health assessment toolkit in the description below that will help you get to the root cause of your sleep problems so that you're not guessing anymore. So do that step first before you move on. Now, the second step after awareness and understanding your unique situation is acceptance. Once you understand yourself and your situation better, you shouldn't be immediately jumping into trying to fix every single little problem and trying to be perfect. You really need to accept that having ADHD does come with some unique challenges, and you can't just make them go away magically. So, for example, if you struggle keeping your phone out of the bedroom, then don't just go cold turkey and just remove it completely, because now when you get into bed, you're going to have no stimulation whatsoever. And that's going to backfire, because then your brain will try and compensate and it will keep you awake with all of these crazy, never-ending thoughts, and it's just going to cause more issues. So you do need to take this step by step, and you need to accept that there's going to be some struggles, and that you are going to have to address those struggles in a slightly different way than how a neurotypical person would do that. So now let's go ahead and find some strategies that actually work for you and your brain, even if they might go against some of the traditional advice that you see out there. And this is where it gets a little bit more practical, so hopefully you'll be able to take away a few ideas that you can implement. The first struggle we're going to talk about is getting up in the morning. That was an issue that I struggled with for many years, and I feel like I have mostly overcome it. But again, I have accepted that it is still a struggle for me. It's never going to be like I open my eyes and I'm so energetic and I just jump out of bed. That's very, very rare. And I have accepted that. But there are strategies that I've put in place to make it easier for me so that I can be consistent. And now, most days, I wake up around the same time. What I would suggest is, if you can, pick a wake up time that actually aligns with your natural chronotype. So are you more of a morning person, an evening person, somewhere in between? And there is a chronotype assessment in my sleep health assessment toolkit as well. So you will know, once you've done the first step, you will know what chronotype you are. Have a look at what is your ideal wake up time according to your chronotype, but also looking at your current lifestyle, your situation, your responsibilities, picking something that is actually achievable for you. If you are taking any kind of ADHD medication like stimulants, then I would suggest that you take them immediately when you wake up, and ideally 30 minutes before you actually get out of bed, because this will again help your transition out of bed. Because once they kick in, you're going to find it much easier to get yourself out of bed and get started with your day. The other thing you can do is use bright lights to, again, help you get going. Because with ADHD, our circadian rhythms are a little bit dysregulated. So our natural body clock, those signals that we get from our body, they're just not as strong. So we kind of have to help it a little bit. So for example, you can, of course, let natural daylight into your room in the morning. That would be ideal. But you can also use sunrise lamps. They basically mimic the natural sunlight, and they get brighter and brighter closer to your wake up time and closer to when you actually need to be getting out of bed. There's lots of different ways you can do that. but I would highly suggest to, yeah, get your room as bright as possible when you need to get up. I would also suggest using a more gentle alarm. I really don't think you should force yourself out of bed and ripping yourself out of your sleep with a really aggressive alarm. I know some people suggest that, get an alarm, put it on the other side of the room, but I've actually noticed that it is kind of counterproductive for me, at least, because it just makes me a bit angry. So I prefer using gentle alarms. I have one on my Fitbit watch, so it just vibrates as I'm waking up, and it just helps me again naturally transition. And what I would also suggest is, I know again this is something I used to struggle with a lot, not using the snooze button. I know it's tricky because you wake up and you just feel so tired, you just want to go back to sleep, and you have these snooze alarms as a backup that you actually get up and you get out of the house and you're not late. But what I've noticed is it just makes me feel worse. So I've completely got rid of the snooze. I would say, if you're really worried about not getting up or not waking up in time, falling asleep again, just have one. So again, if you're picking your latest wake up time, like when you need to actually get out of bed, that could be your snooze, and then maybe 30 minutes before that you have your alarm going off. So you take your medication, have some water, rehydrate your body when you get up, and then you have 30 minutes to just slowly adjust to being awake. Because what I think is really important is when you wake up, don't just try and force yourself to get up immediately. When you have ADHD, it's just going to be more difficult, and you really don't want to fight against it. So when you wake up and you open your eyes, just don't feel like you have to immediately get up, because you'll start to worry and you start to feel anxious and all these emotions come up. So just try and relax and really enjoying that part of your morning, having that part of the morning to yourself almost, where you can let your mind wander a bit and maybe think about something positive that you're going to do that day, like something that you look forward to. And that's what I'd like to do. And then once you're out of bed, go outside immediately. Obviously, if you want to eat something first, that's fine. But I would suggest go outside, get some natural sunlight, and get some movement, because that will help you regulate yourself, make you more focused, make you more alert, so that when you get back inside, you can then start your morning routine, whatever it is that you need to do. And it doesn't need to be very long. It can be 10, 15 minutes. I take my dog out in the morning, so I have a long walk in the morning, and that does really help me. But there is no need to make it super complex or adding a lot of extra steps to your morning routine. Going outside really is going to reset your body clock as well, and that will actually help you sleep better at night. Don't make your morning routine super complex. Just wake up with a gentle alarm, enjoy just lying there, slowly wake up, use some light to help yourself, to support you, and then get out and start moving your body. That's the challenge of getting up in the morning, and I know it's a really difficult one. It took me quite a while to really get out of that cycle, to be honest. It does help that I work from home and that I have a dog that gets me out, of course, but it is possible for anyone. The second challenge is getting into bed on time. And again, just accept the fact that this may be a struggle for you, and it's not going to be perfect every night. So don't try and strive for perfection, but strive for some kind of consistency. So even if one night you get into bed at 11 or 11:30, and then the next night it's 10:30, it's still pretty close. Like, what you want to avoid is obviously going to bed at 2 a.m. and then going to bed at like 9 p.m. the next day. You don't need a 10-step routine to fall asleep. All you need to do really is create some kind of transition between being awake and your daytime activities and going to bed. There needs to be something in between for your brain to understand, okay, it's time to sleep now, and to almost like flip that switch in your brain. And this transition could be 15 minutes, 20 minutes, 30 minutes, an hour, 45 minutes. There's no specific time. Just pick whatever time works for you, and again, is realistic with your schedule. But you do want to create a transition that is quite clear to your brain. And then what I want you to do is utilize a few alarms and reminders to get there. Because what you don't want is to say, okay, I will start my bedtime routine or my transition at 10:30 to then get into bed at 11. But at 10:30 you're in the middle of doing something that you can't get out of, or you have to finish this episode of this TV show because it's so gripping. You need to know what's going to happen next, right? You don't really want to get to that point at 10:30. So what you need is a couple of reminders before that to actually get you ready for that transition, to remind you and remind your brain, okay, we are getting closer to that time, so just get ready. To give you an example, at 10:30, that's when you turn off the TV, you dim your lights, you get changed into your pajamas, you brush your teeth, you do whatever you need to do to kind of get ready and get into bed, so that at 11 p.m. you are completely ready and you can just go to bed, lie down, close your eyes. You want to make it super simple. You don't need to do a meditation routine or yoga or stretches. You need to figure out what it is that you want to do in that time frame and how you're going to get ready for that. Right, so on to the next challenge then, which is racing thoughts. Because once you're in bed, you might still be struggling and you're still lying there with racing thoughts, and it's just going to take you ages to fall asleep. And what you need to do here is accept it. You really need to have radical acceptance of the fact that it is completely normal to have racing thoughts at night. Even as a neurotypical person, everyone has these racing thoughts, especially when we lie down to go to sleep. Our brain is trying to transition to a different frequency, and it means that there will be random thoughts popping into your head. It's your brain processing everything that happened on that day. So it's a really important part of your sleep. And one of the things you can do is simply accept the fact that it will happen. The trick is really not to let these thoughts take over to a point where you get really overstimulated and you just feel wide awake again because you're thinking about all these problems and you're trying to problem solve, while you're trying to fall asleep. It's best to just let these thoughts happen and essentially observe them almost. And I know that sounds quite abstract, but it is a mindfulness technique where you are aware that these thoughts are there and you are letting them happen, essentially observing them, and you're not controlling that process. This is also where a lot of us will then pick up our phone because we will try and distract ourselves from all of these thoughts, because some of them might be uncomfortable, right? And that's when we will do something very counterproductive, which is looking at your phone, scrolling, and trying to distract ourselves. But what you can do instead is using distractions in a very strategic way. What I mean by that is when you have ADHD, your brain does need a certain level of stimulation. You're trying to find that balance there. We need to give our brain a little bit of stimulation, but not too much. And this is where, again, it gets tricky. So instead of picking up your phone and falling into this trap of never-ending content and doom scrolling, you can proactively pick some activities that are able to distract your brain to a point where you are able to fall asleep and where you're still relaxed. I'll give you a few examples. So one of my clients, she does Sudoku before bed and she was actually doing this on her phone or laptop, I can't quite remember, but she was doing it on a screen and she asked me, can I still do that? And I said, well, yeah, it helps you keep your brain kind of a bit distracted and just helps you settle down. It's not really a problem if it's on your phone. What you don't want is then to get distracted by something else on your phone and then you're, back in the rabbit hole. But she actually ended up swapping the device for a physical version. So she's doing it on pen and paper now. That's just one simple example. Again, you don't need to do Sudoku. Another one of my clients, they will, for example, pick a very specific episode of a TV show, something that they like, but again, that has an end to it. It's not something where they are tempted to keep watching, something that they are already familiar with, so it just feels kind of cozy and it's not going to make them anxious because they know what's happening, but it still feels interesting enough because they like the show, right? So it kind of is in the middle there where it's not too boring, but it's not too exciting that your brain can kind of latch onto it and keep going. You want to create this pattern in your brain over time, this signal that it's now time to go to sleep. The last one I'm going to mention here, that's another very common tool, is noise distractions. So instead of lying in there in complete silence, which is tricky if you have ADHD or even other mental health issues, you can turn on certain noises and sounds that will kind of drown out the noise in your brain almost. So it can be a fan or a white noise machine or certain types of noises that you can get from different apps. You can wear these, sleep headphones that will be really tight on your ears and make it really comfortable for you to sleep. So lots of things you can try there. You don't need to meditate or listen to a guided relaxation. There's nothing that is mandatory here. Just because it's the general advice doesn't mean that it won't necessarily work for you. Our brains need a touch of stimulation in order to slow things down and slow those racing thoughts. So think about how you can add a slight touch of stimulation and distraction without overdoing it. So the last challenge I'm going to mention here is waking up in the middle of the night and not being able to go back to sleep. And have you ever heard of that advice that you should get out of bed if you can't sleep and you're lying awake for more than 20 minutes? So it's not bad advice. This is something I do use with my own clients, and there is definitely evidence behind it. But it does need to be adapted, again, to the individual and their personality and their challenges, because it doesn't work for every situation, and especially, again, with ADHD, because what we are often told is that once we get out of bed, we should do a boring activity in the dark. And I don't know about you, but that sounds terrible and painful to me, to just sit in the dark somewhere in my house in the night and do some boring activity rather than sleeping and trying to fall asleep. First of all, getting up requires transitioning from lying there in your bed and being cozy and warm and getting up. So that's the first challenge. And then secondly, doing something boring is just going to backfire because it makes us want to chase dopamine at a time when we really should be asleep. Instead of doing something boring, you should really follow the same approach that you would when you fall asleep in the evening. So pick an activity that, again, keeps your brain just engaged enough and focused on something without going to turn it into a full-on hyper focus and staying up all night and rearranging all the furniture in your house. Again, you might need to experiment with this a little bit, but you could try maybe reading a short story or a few pages in a book that you are familiar with, or if you have a lot on your mind, you could try even journaling, writing down some of those thoughts to get them out of your system. You could try, crosswords, sudokus, whatever. Pick something that you actually enjoy and that you find relaxing. And again, that distracts your mind a little bit. Something that isn't boring or not too boring, but something that feels relaxing to you. And if you have anything that's worked really, really well for you in any of these areas, please share them in the comments, because it might inspire someone else who is currently struggling and help them get better sleep, the next time they get stuck in one of these overthinking and racing thoughts cycles. So in conclusion, what I really want you to remember is that when you have ADHD, you have very unique struggles during the day and at night. And following that, typical sleep advice and kind of forcing your way into it and forcing yourself through that is just not going to work. I really hope that this video has opened your eyes a little bit to the fact that you are going to have to work differently when it comes to creating a bedtime or morning routine and addressing these struggles. And if you have any other questions, please do let me know, put them in the comments, and don't forget the free sleep health assessment toolkit as that first step to really understand your own unique situation and being able to address those underlying reasons as to why you're struggling with sleep. Well, thank you so much and sleep well.